Blessings, welcome. Thank you for joining me on another video. And this time I want to cover a topic on a specific question that I get constantly, especially since starting the second set of locks. I made a recent video with a Q&A just answering some common questions that I've had over the years about my locking experiences and freeforming. But one of the comments that I had, which was really appreciated, was specifically about crochet locks and my own experiences, and actually if I'm happy with the fact that I started my second set of locks with crochet, even though I don't maintain it in this method. So a little bit about my own personal locking history. This is a second set of locks, and I used it, I started my journey this time round using the crochet method. And one of the reasons I used this method was essentially because it was the easiest way for me to put my hair together long enough for it to lock. And I know that sounds weird, but for my texture, for some reason, every time I tried other methods like twisting, or even sometimes with braiding in the very first set of locks that I had, every time I washed my locks, they would just literally just disintegrate, and I wouldn't be able to have my locks held in place, or my hair held in place enough for it to lock fully. So I thought to myself, this time round I want to try something different, and I had a wonderful friend who recommended a loctician who did the crochet method and worked with all different types of hair textures, ranging from straight hair all the way to super kinky, beautiful afro hair. So I decided to go for it, and I already had a huge amount of hair to work with from taking down my first set of locks. So the crochet method is, I think some people call it the instant lock method. I have to double check on this if that's the way they call it, but I'm assuming they call it that because it looks like instant locks. Essentially, you take the hair, you part it, you part your hair where the locks, where you want the locks. Depending on your texture, sometimes they will back comb it a little bit. In my case, I didn't have any hair back combed because I have quite puffy, sort of kinky afro hair. And then they will take a crochet hook. So this is the exact one that he used. I'm not sure if you can see it. This is the one he used to take the cover off, and it's such a small little hook at the end. I think this is 0.6 millimeters, and it just does the trick. It does the trick. So when they part it, they pull the hair together, back comb or not back comb. They kind of roll it a little bit. This is what he did anyway. He rolled the hair, and then when he had the section all rolled up in a kind of cylindrical kind of way, then he would take the crochet and just place it inside and dip it out with hair. Place it inside again, dip it out, and he would do a constant movement like that. And what this does is it collects all the little hairs inside the bundle or the section of hair that's put together, and it would do the locking for you. So it would kind of bind all the hair together so that it can lock up together. And it does look like, in some cases, in my case as well, it looks like I have a full head of locks that have been there for years and years and years. But this is one of the reasons why I wanted to share this video, because I wanted to also share that even though, depending on your texture, of course, and depending on how you maintain your locks, even though they do look like you have instant locks in the beginning, in my experience, they were still very much baby locks. And the reason is they had the kind of outer shell, so it looked like a lock, but because it wasn't fully locked or matured, the inside, I'm not sure how to explain it, but the inside felt very hollow when I touched it, almost like I was kind of pressing on a sponge, with a kind of hollow, with a kind of hollow section inside. So you can tell instantly that even though it appeared like fuller locks, that it wasn't locked at all. And actually over time I still went through the teenage stage of locking, so I still had a lot of frizzy hair. I still had days where I had more bumps than other days. I still had a lot of loose hair as well. And this is one of the reasons why I started my locks with the crochet method, but I also went back 6 months after So essentially I only used the crochet method twice, and that was to start it, and the second one was 6 months later, just to get all the stray hairs and everything binded in place. And from then on I kind of just did my own thing. I did my semi-free form. Sometimes I would maintain the roots, sometimes I would go months without it. And what I noticed was the more I washed my crochet locks, the more they started becoming much more fuller and much more thinner. When I say fuller, I mean fuller on the inside, as in starting to lock and becoming more mature, but it wasn't as puffy, as in spongy. It wasn't as thick as well. It actually became much more thinner. So I would say, for example, this lock here, I remember this one because it was one of the thicker locks that I had when he started it. This was actually twice the size when I did the crochet method on day one. And actually most of my locks were twice the size that you can see now. And the more I washed it and the more mature they got, the more thinner they became. Which surprised me actually, because I was assuming they would stay the same sort of size, but they didn't. So over time, as I decided to do my own thing, to semi-free form, even to sometimes do a full free form, and as you can see, this is what I'm doing now. I haven't maintained my roots for a really long time. I noticed the texture of my new growth versus my crochet hair. My crochet locks were completely different. When I say completely different, I mean, for example, you can probably see this is very kind of uniform and there's hardly any bumps in it. Whereas if I go further up, already you can see over there, there's a bump. Well, there's a few bumps. I've got my hair tied, but there's quite a few bumps along the way. So it felt like they were two locks in one. It's not very noticeable unless you obviously look at it very closely. But for those people who are wondering if you can change your method of maintaining your roots after crochet locks, depending on your texture, it might change. You know, for me it definitely did. My new growth is much more ununiform, much less flatter, much more flatter, sorry, whereas the crochet one seemed to be more kind of rounded and much more uniform. And for me, I enjoy it both ways. It doesn't really bother me, but for those of you who are thinking about doing crochet locks, maybe this is something you want to keep in mind as well. Of course, if you continue maintaining your roots with crochet method, you can probably continue having the same kind of uniform look as when you started it. But these are just some things that I experienced, and maybe you might find them helpful on your journey. So part of the questions that I get from Crochet Locs is also if it can be done in any texture of hair. And online I seem to be seeing a lot of this method for maybe more straighter European hair, but as I said, you can do it for any type of hair. I obviously don't have European straight hair. I have, if I look at the kind of old school chart of what kind of hair I have, it's probably 3C, 4A, depending on which side of the head we're talking about. I have different textures, but it's very Afro hair. So, and it's worked for me really well. So it can be done for people who have straight hair, and there will probably be a lot more backcombing involved. It can also be done with very, very beautiful kinky Afro hair. So don't let that stop you. If you're thinking that it's maybe just for one type of hair texture, then actually no, it's for many different types of hair texture. And one of the beautiful things as well that I like about this method is if you did want to maintain your own roots, you can just buy a crochet hook and do it yourself. So again, just twisting it and just taking the new growth and just placing it in and out until you feel that it's kind of binded together in the form or the shape that you want your lock to be. It takes a bit of practice, but I did try it in the very beginning, and it can be very easy. It's very simple to do. But for my personal choices and how I maintain my locks, I prefer not to use the crochet. I have this around just as a kind of a little bit of a memory, to be honest. But sometimes, actually, not just a memory, now that I'm thinking about it, I will use this to repair my locks. So this is something that has come in handy once in a while. If I've had kind of thin sections of my locks, I will use it to kind of bind the two sections on either side of maybe a very thin section of my locks together, and I would do the same method. So yeah, that's one way you can keep it. If you're not maintaining your roots, you can definitely use it to maintain your locks when they are becoming a lot thinner. And another way you can also use a crochet hook is to round off your tips. So a lot of people, when they start off their locks, they might not have rounded tips, and they might have a lot of loose hairs that kind of look like curly ends, which I think are beautiful, but some people prefer to have rounded tips, and you can use a crochet hook for that as well. So it's quite handy to have around, depending on what you want to do with your hair or your locks. You can always find a solution or a way to use it. So I hope this helps. I'll put a blog post below on my first initial crochet method blog post that I had when I first started the second set of locks, and I'll put on some other links. I'll put down some other links as well. So feel free to share any more questions, and I'll try and make some videos on them as well. So thank you for watching. Hope you enjoyed it, and I will be back soon to share with you guys. Take care of yourselves.